Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Keller. I am the senior software developer at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields. I'm joined here with Roxy Sperber, who is the Clowes conservator of paintings, and Dylan Remis Jensen, who is our editor and manager of publications. We're here to talk catalog that's been in the works for several years now. Dylan, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you to start.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Um, move forward here a bit. So kind of before we get into the catalog project, if you're unfamiliar with us, we've been around for 140 years. We're celebrating an anniversary this year. Founded in 1883 as the Art Association of Indianapolis. We are an encyclopedic art museum. We have something like 40,000. Daniel, if you move that, there we go. 40,000 works.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, 40,000 works in our collection, spanning about 5,000 years. So it's encyclopedic Asian art, African art. We have highlights, a wonderful collection of Edo period paintings, Chinese bronzes, ceramics, contemporary design is a wonderful collection. Within European painting and sculpture, we sort of divide it pre-1850, post-1850, the collection itself. But we have about 500 works from the 12th to 18th century, ranging in style from Romanesque to the Rococo. Nearly, 1/5 to 1/4 of these are from the Clowes Collection, which is recognized for a concentration of masterworks, the Italian, Spanish, Netherlandish, and German schools. Our museum is part, so you'll hear Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields. We're a large institution, 152-acre campus. So we have the museum. We also have a historic estate, the Lily House. We have large gardens, and then an art and nature park across the way. You can see that in this aerial photo. It's that lake is sort of the center of it. So we're one constituent, albeit the largest component of that. Oops. Sorry about that. So Emily Zosser is my predecessor here, is familiar with. This project has a rather long history. There are two other catalogs published on the Clowes Collection. Well, one published, one unpublished. So there's a manuscript by the art historian Mark Roskill, which was done in 1968. Which remained just in the archives here. And then there was a published catalog done in 1973 by Ian Fraser, who was the longtime curator of the Clowes Collection when it was with the Clowes family. The project, I have notes dating back to 2012. That's really kind of when the planning for this started in earnest, but it was planned as a digital publication from the get-go. And it was originally intended to leverage the OSCE platform. So here's the main splash page of the catalog. And I encourage everybody to go and visit it. URLs at the top, paintings.theclowescollection.org. We have sort of kind of like the standard front matter, forward acknowledgments. One interesting aspect of the catalog is that we have two essays about the collection itself. One authored by Shel Langenstein, who's our associate curator of European art, on how the collection was built. The collection was formed by Dr. George H.A. Clowes, who is best known for bringing insulin to market He worked for Eli Lilly. But he started collecting in the 30s, and the collection was assembled from the 30s to the 50s. It was housed in their home, Westerly. Back here for a second. You can see a image of their home right here. The collection was transferred to the museum when we relocated to our present location in the early 70s. Especially constructed pavilion was created to house it. And in 2022, the pavilion was reopened. It had undergone several years of renovation, and then we did a complete reinstallation. So I worked on the interpretation of the reinstallation, as well as the catalog, which published at the same time. So getting back to the catalog itself. The two essays I mentioned, the one about building the Clowes Collection. Roxy, who you hear from in a little bit, did a wonderful essay on Dr. Clowes and his relationship with the sort of burgeoning fields of conservation and conservation science. We also included an extensive notes to the user that explains the different parts of the catalog, the different parts of the catalog entries, the technical reports, and explanations even of certain terminology and designations like school of or circle of, as well as the equipment used by our conservators in analyzing the artworks. So the next slide is kind of a little bit of an overview. Going into the essay itself. So they're arranged by school, kind of like the previous catalog. And when you click on that, you get a gallery of major works. Each essay opens with a hero image that's deep zoomable. And then the entry itself is prefaced by basic object information, the tombstone, with a link to its related technical examination report on the object. So the entry itself, you have a nav bar on the right that outlines the major parts of the essay. So each includes all those components. And then for the comp images in each essay, they are zoomable within kind of the box on the screen, but you could also pop them out for full screen viewing. The footnotes are available as mouse overs, and then if you click on them, it takes you to the endnote section, and then there's a little icon there that will take you back to the exact place you were at within the essay. And then we also have a glossary section. It's primarily conservation terms, but those also function in the same way, where you have a mouse over and then you can click on it and it takes you to the overall list of glossary terms. So with the project itself, as it developed, like from very early on, there was a plan to include conservation reports. And these were authored by the Clowes conservators working on the project. I'm going to hand it over to Roxy here in a little bit. They were originally going to be included just as that, PDFs, but I think we came up with a much better way. So I will hand screen control back to Daniel here, and Roxy, you're up next.
just while we're handing control. Oh, wow, that was quick. Thank you, Daniel. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm the Clowes Conservator of Paintings. I'm not the first Clowes Conservator of Paintings to work on this project. I was just looking in the chat. It doesn't look like we have a ton of conservators here, so I'll try to explain a little bit about why the technical information was so important from my perspective. I'm going to try to advance the slides here first. Can I not see the? All right, guys. Oh, there we go. Okay. So as Dylan so nicely set up, this was a project that had been in the works for a long time. The previous Clowes Conservator Paintings, Fiona Beckett, and our previous chief of the conservation department at the IMA, David Miller, had done a really nice job of sort of developing the format for the template that they wanted to use to include information. So as was discussed a little bit already, Dr. Clowes, the collector, was collecting as conservation was developing as a field and becoming professional in a scientific way. So there was this really nice parallel, which I discuss in the essay, about sort of the scientific development of the medical profession and the scientific development of conservation itself. And so we felt it was really appropriate, and the family, who are, I should say, very involved, have been involved in this process and are still very involved, were also very intentional about wanting to include scientific information. So that was sort of a nice impetus for this portion of the work. But as Dylan said, originally when I came on the project in 2018, the plan was to have the reports be simple PDFs. So you'll see here, I'm gonna play this video where you're kind of scrolling through the extensive PDFs that Fiona had prepared. So she had drafted probably a third of the entries and done these wonderful photos. So you can see there's all of this conservation imaging that she and Erica Schuler, who was a fellow at the time under her, had done a lot of the imaging. So we had imaged in all the different types of light that conservators like to see, but they were just amended to the PDF as this sort of page. And that was something that I sort of felt, well, you know, this is a bit frustrating, because when I first came on the project, because I felt like this was conceived as an online catalog, but some of the most critical information from my perspective, granted I'm biased, but some of the conservation images were just going to be static images. And so this is when I started chatting with Daniel, who had also recently kind of started on the project. And I was sort of saying, look, we've got these PDFs. Is there any way that we could at least make the overall conservation images zoomable? And he thought about it, took some notes, as he does, came back to me and was like, I mean, maybe this is possible, but why wouldn't we just make the whole thing interactive in the same way? And I probably have some text messages to people being like, oh my gosh, I was super excited because this was actually my dream and my sneaky attempt to try to insert the technical portion. I think those of you who have worked on catalogs before probably know that it's typical to have sort of a technical notes section that's been adopted pretty widely. But what isn't so common is to have a technical entry that is actually sort of on par, I guess, with the art historical entry. So that's what we aim to do. So I'm going to advance here. You can see this video. Come on, there we go. This video kind of shows you what we ended up coming up with. So this is the art historical entry, which you can then go into the technical images, and you can see this is actually kind of a 4-part piece, a polyptych. And so you can see that there's, you know, conservation imaging of all these different lights of every single one, and they're all fully zoomable. So it's, you know, really utilizing the information that we gather. We take these really high quality images, x-rays, etc. And so, yeah, and so then you kind of see the overall how this technical report is then created. So there are all these different sections. We basically took the PDF and turned it into a more interactive experience. So that's been really exciting. I'm going to let this play through a little bit so you can kind of get a sense of how that all looks. Daniel was able to take some of those check boxes and, you know, turn them into these really nice, clear diagrams. Obviously, we have some really great zoomability. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about the different widgets that we developed and how we work together on that. But I think this overview gives you a good sense of just how different that PDF that video scrolled through is from what the final product was. And that was largely just having colleagues, including Daniel and Dylan, who are and our curators as well. Everybody who worked on the project really were intent on including this sort of more materials focused approach. So I'm going to advance the slide. So when I met with Daniel, after he gave me that very exciting news that maybe we could just make everything interactive, I had no idea really how, what I was setting myself up for because my predecessor had drafted these wonderful reports, but obviously hadn't been thinking of them as something that would be fully interactive. So that really required me to then go back to all of her reports and kind of rethink them a little bit, edit them a little bit. But when I met with him, he sort of said, okay, what would be your kind of list of things that you would need to make these reports fully kind of interactive? And we came up with some really pretty simple tools. I checked with Danielle. I was like, these were simple to build, right? I didn't just make this up. And he was like, yep. So it wasn't anything, we didn't reinvent the wheel. This is nothing that I like dreamed up. They're really all things that other people have used. But just having these kind of simple tools has made the experience, I think, way more interactive. So here you can see on the left is what the PDF of this signature from a report about a Claude Lorraine painting. And here you can see, you know, oops, sorry, kind of how much more interactive you could, if you're a conservator, you could be, or an art historian, you could be looking carefully at those cracks to see if there's, you know, in painting there, or if those are original. And, you know, every single image is fully zoomable. So that's great. Come on. Here we go. The other relatively simple tool is a slider. As you can see here, this is a report that Fiona wrote, and it was clear that she wanted to have this false color infrared image beside a visible light image, so you could kind of compare and contrast. It's important to be able to see them both. Obviously, a slider is a way better way to do that. So this is, again, fully zoomable image. You can really get in there and see, you know, what the false color looks like, what the visible light looks like. Pretty simple, but makes all the difference. Lastly, we have cross-section samples of a lot of cross-section samples. We worked really closely with our scientist, Greg Smith, to collect a lot of technical data in the science lab, and we really wanted to make that available as well. So this, for those of you who aren't familiar with the cross-section, it's basically shows the paint layers from the bottom up. So it's the ground, the imprimatur layer, and the paint layer here. And then we can put that in a scanning electron microscope and do EDS mapping, basically get a picture of what the different particles are. And so it's important to be able to kind of cross-reference these different images because they're maps of different electrons. So, or sorry, not different elements. And so it's great to be able to have this simultaneous movement and zoom feature that Daniel was able to develop for us, so we can really look at all of these things at the same time, look at a particular particle, zoom in, and the reader can do that as well. So those are a few examples of ways in which we utilized, like I said, pretty simple tools to really bring this technical information to life. All right. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dylan to speak a little bit about workflows.
All right, thank you, Roxy. Let me advance the screen here. So this ended up being, I mean, it's a pretty big catalog. The content is divided into kind of major works and then additional works. So we had 46 major works, each with an essay and a technical examination report. There's 31 additional works. Those just got a tombstone and then an image. At the end of the day, we ended up with 23 essay authors. There's a few more that were involved along during the history of the project. We lost them for various reasons, but 23 authors, 6 conservators or conservation scientists were involved, and 4 editors. And this is just a ballpark guesstimate. I should sit down and figure out exactly, but I mean, over 800 manuscript pages and at least 1,000 images. One of the unsung heroes of this project is our rights team that had to clear all of the images. Advance a bit. Sorry, what time? When the project started, it really kind of began in earnest, say like late 2016, early 2017, and a lot of the early workflow was managed by very basic tools, email, local and network folders, and spreadsheets. For project management within the museum, we've been using for a number of years Basecamp. Many of you are probably familiar with that. It worked at the beginning to our advantage because it was easy to invite external authors and other people to join sites. We didn't have to do anything with like special permissions. So we set up a number of folders to share materials, and they would upload their essays there. But as I mentioned, the project has a long history. So a number of the early entries were authored by Clowes Fellows here, and they were kind of done in a variety of formats. So there's kind of like a lot of nuts and bolts editorial work that we had to do, creating templates, style guide for contributing authors, style sheet. We created a standardized way for authors to submit their image requests, and then on the right here you can kind of see it was a very basic Word template for the essays themselves. As far as kind of like the workflow, the authors would send their essays in primarily to the project lead, which was our curator of European art, Annette Schlagenhoff. Sadly, she retired last month, so she's not here at the museum every day. So we all miss her. But yeah, she was kind of the real powerhouse behind this. And then from her to me, we had an external editor that I was collaborating with, and sometimes the essays would go first to the external editor, sometimes they go to me, but we'd both look at them, back to the author, and then be finalized. And then if the authors were touching on conservation issues, they would go to Roxy and any additional conservation staff, like our conservation scientist, Greg Smith, to look at if need be. The thing is, with Basecamp, it's great for project management. It is terrible for file management. And when we kind of got into the full-on production of this, versioning of these Word documents became an issue. So we transferred everything over to OneDrive, and we use now for communication within the museum Microsoft Teams. And Roxy, in a second, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of like the project management tools that are available through Teams that we adopted, and which actually are now going to be adopted museum-wide. We're moving away from Basecamp. But we set up OneDrive folders to hold all of the materials, the essays, the tech reports, the image request lists, and that allowed either to work simultaneously on a document, which is nice, and if my hard drive died, we wouldn't lose a significant chunk of the project. So I will turn this over to Roxy now.
I need control. I think I can just talk about this slide.
Mm.
Oh, I got control anyway. So we were kind of a pilot project for the museum to be trying Microsoft Teams. This was sort of during the pandemic, everything went to OneDrive. We all kind of, as we shut down the institution for, I don't know, 3 or 6 months, I think 3 months, nobody was on site. We just kind of pulled all of our files. And so we were able to kind of use some of these new Microsoft tools and experiment with them. And the conservation department, we were starting to use Microsoft Planner. And it was not something I'd ever really used before and heard, but I just wanted to give a big plug for it. If you're managing a project like this, I'm not sure how easy it is to see, but basically each of these entries, each of the technical entries, I made a technical reports plan. Each of the entries had its own task, as they're called. And then we made sort of the different stages buckets, which is what they call these columns here. So basically you could take one of these tasks, and I've blown it up here on the right, and you could kind of progress it through. You could attach the report. This one doesn't, you can't see the attachment, but basically you could attach the report from the file in Teams. So you knew where the most recent report was. You could tag people. So this was sort of the checklist of what needed to happen when I have Daniel here. Maybe he needed to do something to Lightbox, it looks like. So I would assign the task to him. He would have a quick look at what I needed. He would get it done, and then he would check it off. And then I would see that, and I could move it right along. And the same is true for anybody else on the project. So it worked really, really nicely, really smoothly. I think there's probably even more integration that we could have used that we didn't know about yet. We're still kind of learning, but it has a lot of different, due dates and start dates and all of that kind of stuff. So it really allowed us to see visually where each of these kind of pieces was in the process, because it does get very overwhelming when you have so many moving parts. You're sort of like, oh my gosh, follower of Bosch, where was that in the process? What did we have to do on that? You could just pull up the task and you would see, oh, I needed to update it, blah, blah, blah. So that was a really nice feature, I think, for us. So I'm going to hand it over to Daniel to talk about his portion.
Yeah, thank you. We see, oh, perfect. Do I have control of the screen yet? How do I take control back?
Oh, hold on. Maybe I need to give you control. There we go.
There we go. All right. So Roxy's talked a little bit about some of the project management workflows. We also had several developer programming workflows that we've implemented. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the collection catalog is built on Quire. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Quire and the project that the Getty is working on. I'm going to give a very brief overview because some of the details will be a bit important later. So it's built on the pre-release version of Quire. So this is Quire version 0. And Quire is being developed by the Getty as a sustainable digital publications platform. And it looks to build on lessons learned from OSCE and the OSCE toolkit that came out of the OSCE initiative. So Quire and the static site generator that Quire is built on store page content in plain text formats like Markdown and YAML, and combine the style and content of a web page before that page is made available to the public on the web. This is dissimilar to how more traditional CMSs work, like Drupal and WordPress. Drupal is the CMS that the OSCE toolkit was built on, where page content is stored in a database and the page is kind of assembled with the style on the fly when the user makes a request to view the page. So storing content of a static site in plain text is simpler and requires less upkeep than using a database. Reading and writing text files, these text files can be done through any text editor and don't require specialized software knowledge to modify and maintain. Static sites are also considerably cheaper to host. Often it can be done for free. The Clowes catalog is hosted on GitHub static pages for the cost of the domain, which is like $14 a year, I think. And there's little maintenance because that static site server is maintained by Microsoft. And so we don't have to worry about that. So a Quire page is made up of 4 elements. Each page starts with a block of structured YAML that represents metadata of the page. You can see that here, up here on the left. So in our YAML, we've got a list of the authors for this page, the type of page, the title of the page, and then we've also included some metadata that's unique to our project. So each page has an image carousel at the top of it, and so we actually have an identifier for that image carousel that we add to the page so that we can, when the page is being built, know what carousel to go and fetch to assemble into the page. So the next section of a quire page is made up of Markdown. This is the body text content of the page. And Markdown is very versatile, so it can be used to represent most rich text styling, such as bold, italics, underline, strike through, links, headers, so on and so forth. Then within the Markdown, we have shortcodes. Shortcodes, or we can kind of call them, I refer to them as page widgets. They're bits of structured text that add more functionality to the page that Markdown isn't able to handle. So this would be like our deep zoom images or our slider images. If we have special anchor styling on the page, we can do that through a shortcode. You could include video, 3D assets, maps. I believe Quire comes actually with several shortcodes built into it. Recently, they just released a new 3D asset viewer, which is a pretty cool tool. But a lot of shortcodes that we were able to customize and build out ourselves for this project. The final aspect of a page that you won't see here in this image is the metadata that's within the project. So within a Quire install, there's a directory that's called data, and it will include lists of YAML page, or it will include several YAML pages that include lists of data that you may want to access from several different areas within the catalog. So this will be a bit important later. But for now, just know that we have several files that just contain lists of authors, lists of our artworks, lists of all the images on the site, the list of all the image carousels on the site, things like that. So Quire is highly customizable, as I said, and I know Jill Dodge here is in the chat, and I know that she did an amazing job reworking the kind of default layout of the Quire project to make a unique design that's a little bit more similar to a traditional website. Now, as Dylan mentioned, we have a lot of content in this project. We've got 31 additional works. It says 41 scholarly entries because that's my own count. So I think Dylan's been a little bit more accurate. He had 46. And then we've got
that includes the stragglers.
Okay, yeah, some stragglers. I think there's some updates that are going to come in the future.
Yeah.
And then we've got our 54 technical reports. So our 32 authors and contributors don't work directly in Markdown in a text editor. They work in tools that are familiar to them, namely Microsoft Word. So our team needed to somehow get all of that content that the authors created from Microsoft Word into Markdown. And then add all of the, process all of our images, add all the shortcodes, add any additional formatting. It's kind of a daunting task. But seeing that Microsoft Word and Markdown both support very similar rich text features, it seemed possible to programmatically make this conversion. And that's what we set out to do. So we created a Word-to-Quire pipeline using a tool called Pandoc. Again, if you're familiar with Quire's documentation, you might be familiar with Pandoc. They've got I know the Getty's got a section where they talk about what Pandoc is and how it can be used. But as a summary, Pandoc is an open source universal document converter. So it creates a generalized structure for converting from dozens of different text file formats. By creating mappings to and from this generalized set of blocks and inline elements, one document structure can be converted into another document. So we know that both Word and Markdown have headers and tables, lists, text stylings, hyperlinks, footnotes, etc. So we could build mappings between these two documents. thankfully, Pandoc actually does this out of the box. So with zero configuration, let me pop over to my next slide. We're able to, in one command, in that one command line command, get a document that is 90% of the way to a finished Quire document. So you can see that happened really quick, but on our left, we have our scholarly entry. We ran our command here at the top of the command line, and on the right, we have our converted markdown document that was just created. Now this document is 90% of the way there. There's still another 10% that needs to be added. We still need to add our YAML block at the top. We still need to download and process all our images. We still need to add our shortcodes. But thankfully, Pandoc is extendable with additional filters written in Python. So we are actually able to create a simple Python filter that allows us to intervene at any point during the document conversion process. So for example, we can use this to strip any leading white space from headers. We can use this to prepend the YAML block at the top of the document from metadata that's found in external systems. We can find the first occurrence of every glossary word in each page and then highlight it and turn it into a hyperlink that sends it out to, that will send users out to the glossary. And we can inject our shortcodes. So because these Pandoc filters are just Python scripts, we can also access external resources. So by marking up the Word document with comments, our editors are able to tell the pipeline where to insert shortcodes. So in this example, at the bottom left here, we've got an example of our Word document, and Dylan's highlighted figure 1 and added a identifier for an image that's found in Piction, as well as the caption that he would like to associate with that image. So the Pandoc, when it gets to this point in the conversion process, when it gets to that line, our filter will see the comment. It will make a request out to Piction to download the image by that identifier. And then it converts that TIFF into an image that's deep zoomable. You can see that here on the left, where it generates derivatives for that image. Then it inserts the shortcode that we need into the markdown with references to those derivatives it just created, as well as the caption that Dylan has created over here. And then it adds the image to our figure.yamls file. So as I mentioned, Quire has these data files of images or other content. And if we have an image in a document somewhere, we don't want to also have to go in and add the image manually to these YAML lists. So this will happen all programmatically. So in a similar fashion, we can fetch other metadata from Piction. So actually every Word document that we've got stored in Piction, so we can put our source files into Piction. We can store with those Word documents metadata about the artwork that's associated with that document, and pull out that metadata and put that into our YAML files in our project. My kind of grand vision for the project was a fully automated process with one button click, it will build the whole catalog. Now we had some challenges with that in the long run. So to ensure the catalog had consistent styling and layout, the source documents in Word need to be formatted in a very specific way. So in Word, you can set your headers to be headers 3 or headers 2. And when we build the final web page, we want to be sure that we're consistent in our styling. So I had to create this sort of a manual for the catalog, a style guide of sorts, which provided Roxy and Dylan with information about how should headers be formatted? How should you format a link? What formats do you need for comments in order to be able to go have the system go and fetch that image? So this became easier with practice and over time, but occasionally there were still documents that would come through where a header wouldn't be quite right. I kind of became a last resort editor where I would review the document really quick before it would go through the pipeline. There are a few issues in Word itself. So Word actually contains a few bugs where you can highlight a text as being a certain header, and the UI will display it as that header, but then it's not represented as that header in the metadata underneath the hood. So we would have some issues where we'd have to go in and I would have to reapply a style to a header in order to get it to register. Checkboxes were a huge issue, actually. Word doesn't represent checkboxes in a way that Pandoc can see them very well. So we had to resort to using our kind of comments to short codes method to represent checkboxes, and that was a little bit cumbersome. You can see here in this example, we have these large tables that Roxy created. And you can see all of her comments here: checked, not checked, checked, not checked, and that's her designating the creation of a checkbox. So there's some improvement there that needs to be worked out, figure out how to streamline some of these, represent some of the short codes a little bit better. But one of the other issues that we struggled with was feedback. So obviously when you're working within Quire within the command line and a text editor, your feedback is much faster. You type something in the text editor, Quire works in the background and renders the page that you directly in the web browser. Now this requires you to have a local environment, a dev environment installed. You need to have Quire installed. You need to have the actual project installed on your local. So you get instant feedback, but then there are some maintenance challenges there. So with our method, feedback's a little bit slower. As Roxy noted, we use Teams in order to manage our project, and I would get notifications when a new edit was ready to go through the pipeline. But developer involvement was necessary in order to run the pipeline. So in the future, there are improvements that I want to there are improvements that I would like to work towards in order to kind of find a middle ground between this automated pipeline and the command line text interface that Quire currently relies on. So I'm not quite sure what that looks like. It might be some kind of a light UI that obfuscates some of the command line interface, maybe through a text editor plugin. I know a very common text editor and one that we use is called Visual Studio's Code. And they actually include, there are community members who have built Pandoc plugins for that text editor. So there are some ideas that I'm kind of mulling about. How can we improve on this? My initial vision for the one-click build the whole catalog sort of project kind of started to become a lower priority as the project progressed, and we started to see some of the challenges in editing and some of the challenges in the workflow. Obviously, my assumption that we would have every single page ready to build before we built the catalog was not a valid assumption, and that's not how authors work. I know that even up until a few weeks before releasing the project, we were still waiting on some authors to get some content in. So I'm excited to see where we'll go in the future. I know we've got a few other catalogs in the work. We're going to see Clowes, another iteration of the Clowes catalog that includes tapestries and maybe even some of the other artworks from that collection. We've got one on Pizarro that we're doing. Is that correct? We're excited to see that be released here soon. Yeah. Do we have any questions? That's the extent of what we've got.
I've got an initial question, Daniel, and to the team. Thank you all for sharing all this. It's been great to see. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship or if there is a relationship between what you've published in the catalog and if you have collections pages online as well, if any of this information lives elsewhere, and if you had a conversation around that?
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't have a formal relationship between objects in this, I should say formal. We don't have a technical relationship between objects in the catalog and our online collection. We are actually in the process of rebuilding our online collection. with a new API, a new public API. So we're really excited to have the beta for that launch in the next few months here. And so my vision is that when that new API launches, we can really use that as a foundation for many of our projects. Unfortunately, that's not yet in place. So it was not something that we implemented for this catalog.
Cool, thank you.
Hey team, I have a related question, which is just what is your strategy for promotion of the catalog, or have you been working with libraries at all to see what kind of how you can get it out into library systems or whatever else? What is your strategy there?
Yeah, that's sort of in process. We are currently without a librarian, although that should be remedied fairly soon here on site. Yeah, and there's been some discussion with the marketing team for just kind of like marketing promotion of it. There will be some updates. I mentioned some straggler essays coming fairly soon, hopefully next month. DOIs will be assigned to all of the pages, and from there, we'll kind of continue with promotional strategies for the catalog.
Thank you. This is all super impressive.
Yeah, please spread the word, because a lot of this
Yes.
is out.
Yeah.
It looks like there's a question in the chat too. I'll state it out loud there. Jessica's asking, are you using IIIF images, especially for the sliders and zoomables? And then where or how do you host those images, those image files?
Yeah, so for this project, we're not using IIIF images. I mentioned our online collection rebuild, and with that rebuild, we'll be hosting our own IIIF server, and that will be hooked up to our collection images. So again, in the future, my hope is that we'll be able to rely on those IIIF images. For that project, for the collection and future projects, we host those images in AWS S3. For this project, we actually just take the images and cut them. We manually cut them up into pyramid deep zoom images. So they are actually stored with the project in GitHub. So it's a big GitHub repository. And one of the struggles that we ran into with Quire is that when you get to a certain number of images, it will no longer, it can't handle dynamically reloading the site as you're developing it. So once towards the end of the project's build, I was actually needing to, every time I made an update, run a command manually to get the site to my developer environment to refresh because of so many images that were in this project. All right, great. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank everyone for being here and for listening to us ramble about what we're passionate about. I've got our next webinar is going to be on October 17th. So we're, again, please join the mailing list. Be excited to share any sort of things that you might discover or a project you may be working on. We're really excited to hear from the community on this.